So in the last example, what I was trying to illustrate is you have the ability to build on different effects to create more and more dramatic results. So in that case, we were creating a more dramatic shadowing effect and more depth to the text. The problem is we were pretty much committed to those effects as we applied them. In this example, we're going to take a look at how we can apply effects, but have a little bit more control over the original content associated with the document. We're going to do this by using smart objects. I'm working with a document called text.psd, which is available in your resources folder. You'll notice in this document we have 3 different text layers. What I'd like to do is combine all 3 of these text layers into one smart object. So make sure you have the first layer selected, which in this case is show. Hold down the shift key on your keyboard to select the last layer, which is celebrity. This is all 3 text layers now. On the Macintosh, go ahead and right-click in that highlighted area. If you're on a Windows machine, you can go ahead and right-click. In the contextual menu, you can choose Convert to Smart Object. What this does is it converts it to an object that is a protective container. So the text is protected. We can always go back and modify the text, change the size, the font, any attribute that we could change with text would still be available to us. What we'd have to do is double-click this icon. A dialog box will appear telling you that Photoshop is about to open a different document. Inside that document, if you make changes, you're going to have to save those changes before returning to the PSD in order for you to see those changes. Okay, go ahead and click the OK button, and you can see the text in all 3 layers. So here, if we wanted to manipulate this in any way, like I said, change the font, we would have that ability. I'm not overly concerned about that right now, so I'm going to close this document and return to the PSD. What we want to do now is start applying some effects to this text. The first thing that I want to do is I want to apply a halftone pattern. And in order for us to do that, you want to make sure that you're working with a black foreground and a white background color. You can press D on your keyboard to get those swatches to appear in their default colors. Make sure that the show layer is the active layer. Then come up to the filter menu, and under the filter menu, you can choose sketch. And from there, you can choose halftone pattern. This is going to open up the halftone pattern dialog box. Now, what's great about this is a smart filter being applied to a smart object, which means you can always come back and make changes to your settings here and have complete control over this filter at any point in time while you're working with your document. So in this case, I'm going to leave the size set around 2, the contrast set to 1, and the pattern type will be set to dot. Once you have those settings, go ahead and click OK, and you can see that that filter is now applied to the text. Well, we want to keep adding some more filters and some more effects to this text. So what we want to do now is render some clouds. But before we do, I'd like to load the selection of the text. Go ahead and press the Command key while clicking on the icon for the show layer. That would be the Control key on Windows. And what that's going to do is load a selection for the content on that layer. Next, what I want you to do is come up to the filter menu, and under the filter menu, you can choose render, and from here, you can choose clouds. It's going to go ahead and render clouds across the entire image. What we want to do now is we want to mask this out based upon our text. So come over here. This, believe it or not, where it says Smart Filters, is actually a mask. If you click to highlight that little masked area, you can then inverse your selection, which is Command-Shift-I, Control-Shift-I on Windows. And then what we want to do is we want to fill this area with black. So you're simply going to hold down the Command key and press Delete on the keyboard. That would be Control-Delete or Control-Backspace on Windows. So now we can deselect this, Command-D or Control-D on Windows. We can see that we have clouds applied over our halftone pattern. Now what's nice about this is you can change the stacking order of these filter effects. And if any point in time you want to change the effect, just double click it, and you'll get a warning dialog box. Go ahead and click OK, and then you can make your changes. In this case, we don't want to, so I'm going to click Cancel. But what I would like is I'd like to have the halftone pattern appear above the clouds filter. So click and drag that to change the stacking order. And now you'll notice that the halftone pattern is above the clouds. Now we can also manipulate the individual blending modes and opacity values for each of these filters. Just double click on this little icon to the right of the name of the filter. It's going to open up the blending modes dialog box. And in this case, what we want to do is set the mode to hard light, and we also want to change the opacity. I'm going to change the opacity to something like 50%. Remember, you can always come back and modify this later. Go ahead and click OK, and you can see we're getting a more interesting effect now. Now, if you don't like the way that the clouds are rendered, it's not a big deal. If you double-click the clouds, because the clouds filter doesn't have a dialog box, it's just going to redistribute the clouds. And when you double-click it, you'll get this warning dialog box. For this example, I'll check Don't Show Again and click OK, and you can see that the clouds are redistributed. Now, you can double-click it until you're happy with the appearance of the clouds in relationship to the text. And so this looks pretty good. Now what we want to do is add some more color to this. So in order for us to add some color, I'm going to right-click or control-click on the mask layer to load in the selection of the text. Then we're going to add an adjustment layer. So down here towards the bottom, we can go ahead and add a hue saturation adjustment. And in the adjustments panel, you want to check colorize. And you'll notice it's starting to add color to the text. I actually want this text to be a little bit more orange, so I'm going to bring the hue to the right. I'm going to amp up the saturation quite a bit, somewhere in the 60s. And you'll notice now we have a glow, and we're getting more of a metallic look from this text. So I like the way that this looks, but what I'd like to do also is set the blending mode for this adjustment layer. That's one of the great powers of working with adjustment layers and smart objects. You have full control over all blending options. So in this case, because it is a layer, we do have blending mode options. Again, I'm going to set this to vivid light. So I'm going to go ahead and select that and set it to vivid light. And I'm pretty happy with that appearance. But if you wanted to, in this case, because the clouds are a little too pronounced, we can come over to the clouds filter. And with that, we can adjust the opacity. Let's come over here and double-click the icon for clouds specifically, not for the entire layer. And here we're going to drop the opacity down to 60%. And so now we're seeing less of the clouds and more of that brightness. So I'm pretty happy with that. Now what we want to do is we want to add a bevel to this text. So with the show layer as the active layer, let's come down here and add a layer style. We want to add a bevel and an emboss. So go ahead and select that option, and you'll notice the defaults aren't looking so good, so we want to modify this a little bit. What we want to do is decrease the size of it. I want to bring it down to something smaller, like 1 or 2. That looks pretty good. The other thing I don't want to use is global light. I'm going to turn that off and bring the angle down a little bit, making the image look like a light source is down here from the bottom shining up on this text. You can try an inner shadow. I think it's making it look a little bit too bubbly, but we can adjust the depth a little bit. I'm going to drag this down, and we can also adjust the size. I think that looks pretty good. If you don't like it, you can always turn it off. You always have that ability to turn it on and turn it off. So I'm happy with the layer style. Go ahead and click OK once you're done. This is looking a lot better. The only thing I want to do now is maybe add more of a glow to the text. So the option here is to come over to the Channels panel, and what I'd like you to do is control-click or right-click on the RGB channel. What we're doing here is selecting the luminosity within the image. Now that we have the luminosity selected, let's come back to the Layers panel, and I want to create a new layer. I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer above all the other layers. And in this new layer, what I'd like you to do is highlight the eyedropper tool in the Tools panel and select one of these orange colors that you see within the image simply by clicking. Then go ahead and hold down the Option key on the Mac and press Delete. It would be Alt or Backspace on Windows. And once you do that, it's going to add a color effect throughout the text. Go ahead and deselect it. We want it to look a little bit more glowing-like. So with this layer selected, let's come up to the Filter menu, and under the Filter menu, we can select Blur. We're going to go with Gaussian Blur, and let's blur it somewhere around 6 pixels or so, and then go ahead and click OK. And finally, if you want, we can take the opacity down on this layer just a touch, and now we have a nice glowing effect for this text. The last thing that we can do if we wanted to add one more element is we could choose the paintbrush tool, and we're going to use a white color for the paintbrush. In the brushes palette, what we want to do is load in some new brushes. So to the right here, I'm going to click this arrow, and down in this drop-down menu, we want to load the assorted brushes, and we can just append that to our existing brushes. And then scroll down, and as you scroll down, you'll see these little starbursts, so to speak. That looks pretty good. You can press Enter or Return to hide that panel, and then just click a couple times around each of the letters. You don't want to go crazy, but you just want to add a couple little sparklies here and there around some of these letters. And so this was just an example of how you could use smart objects to create a text effect. And in this case, if we wanted to come back and change any element of the text, remember, it's a smart object. We can double-click it to open up the file where we can modify each layer for each piece of text. And we can also come back and modify any one of the filters that we applied, or even the hue saturation because we have applied it as an adjustment layer or a smart filter. So anything is customizable. We can always go back and modify and tweak this until we get the effect to look exactly the way that we want to.